Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to QGTV. We're still in Ramadan 2011, day 18 of our chapter studies, and today we hope to do three chapters, which are Al-Ahzab, chapter 33, Sabah, chapter 34, and Al-Fatir, chapter 35. So let's begin. We begin with chapter 33, Al-Ahzab. Chapter 33 comes after a long break in what we call the hard chapters. Hard chapters are chapters which are very instructive. They focus on instruction. O people, O Bani Israel, O believers, do this, do that, etc. Very instructive. Then interspersed with those types of surahs, chapters are soft chapters, which are focused more on the reader's personal experience with Allah. The reader is given knowledge of Judgment Day or the hour. His faith is examined. He sees signs. So those are the softer chapters. And now we're back to a hard chapter after a few days, because our last hard chapter was chapter 24, An-Nur, where we discussed the rule of Allah and the Messenger. Here, the focus is on the Nabi. The Nabi is seen as the personality which brings, or rather which has the Naba or the news. So he stands on a higher plateau because his vision, he has supervision. So he sees everything, if you like, of the situation. So the beginning of Al-Ahzab focuses on the Nabi. It's an address to the Nabi. And it tells him not to obey those who conceal and those people whose faith is not in their hearts. Then it continues and talks about the Nabi's relationship with the believers. So he's like the leader of the believers, and I can actually see why, because he has that capacity for higher news. So he connects to the believers through knowledge of that higher news. Then we move on to another passage, verses 9 till 27, which talks about the believers in a state of war. And that includes Rasulullah as an example. The Uswa Hasanah verse. This passage includes that. So in this context, we can see how Rasulullah is your Uswa Hasanah, beautiful example. That's verse 21, by the way. And believers are meant to emulate him in this context. Verse 28, that's the Nabi's address to his azwaj, the people who are close to him, who have intimacy with him, and they are not to seek the glitter of this world. And if they want the glitter of this world, they should be set free. Then it comes to verses 30 to 31, which talks about the Nisa'un Nabi, who are guilty of fahsha or injustice, and they are given double punishment. Then verses 32 to 40, again to the Nisa'un Nabi. So these are very unique addresses. Ya Nisa'un Nabi, Ya Azwajun Nabi. These are very unique addresses, unique only to this chapter. And I think if we take that into account, it will be easier for us to isolate the theme of this chapter. So 32 to 40 to the Nisa'un Nabi again. This time about the management of their buyut, or their houses. Then it moves on. Verse 33 addresses the Ahl al-Bayt. It says, Ya Ahl al-Bayt. So these are the people who have got their buyut together and have now formed a bayt, or a system. And they are purified by Allah. Allah says He purifies them. Verse 35 talks about the traits of such people, and verse 36 about their obedience to the messenger. Then we move on to verses 41 to 44, the believer's relationship with Allah. This includes an ayat which talks about Allah supporting the believers. It says, right, هُوَ الَّذِي يُصَلِّي عَلَيْكُمْ. It is He who gives His support or His connection on you. وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ وَمَلَائِكَتُهُ sorry وَمَلَائِكَتُهُ and his angels لِيُخْرِجَاكُمْ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ that he may take you out from the darknesses into the light. وَكَانَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَحِيمًا and he is like a womb to the believers. So this is the support of Allah and his angels onto the believers. Next is verses 45 to 48, the Nabi's role with the believers. He acts as a lamp to them. Next, the believers' role with the mu'minat. Possibly these are believers in a weakened state or new believers. Then 50 to 52 talks about the Prophet and laws of marriage. 53 to 58, the believers' roles about the houses of the Nabi. So here the Nabi's privacy is guarded. So that even though the Nabi has a very intimate role, a very supportive role on the believers, they are not to disrupt his privacy. Next we have verses 59 till 68, which talks about the troublemakers in Al-Madinah. So there the situation of Al-Madinah is mentioned, which is not mentioned elsewhere. So here we need to take that into account. What does Al-Madinah actually mean? Then it takes us to verse 69, and I think it's very interesting here that verse 69 is mentioned. If we see this, so verse 69 is a single verse passage, and it says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O ye who have believed. Believed in what? Believed in the entirety of this chapter. لا تكونوا كالذين أذوا موسى. Do not be like those who took liberties with Musa or who hurt Musa. So here again we need to look in the rest of the Quran and see what exactly did the people of Musa or Bani Israel, what exactly did they do to Musa? So what they did to Musa prevented them from reaching the state. And indeed, I mean, if you look at, I think it would be chapter 5 from verses 20 to 26, it talks about Bani Israel who annoyed Musa to such an extent that he said, please separate me from these people. So I mean, that is probably where we can understand the rest of where we can understand the elaboration of this point. Verse 70, O ye who have believed, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu again, attaqullah, take guard of Allah, wa qulu qawlan sadida, and speak straight words or make your talk straight. So here, this is the last bit of this passage where Allah gives us the instructions so that we may begin to actualize this process. So there we have it. This is the end of chapter 33. So as we can see, chapter 33 is very context specific. It has a specific context. I would even call that context Al-Madinah. And it speaks about the role of the Nabi to the believers and the believers to the Nabi. And I do believe that the reason why before this passage is before this chapter is chapter 31 and chapter 32, which is Luqman and As-Sajda, and after that is Saba and Fatir. The reason is these two pairs of chapters are bridged by this situation. In other words, the instructions given in Luqman and Sajda will lead to this situation, and once you have the situation, you are to take notice of the instructions in chapter 34 Saba and chapter 35 Al-Fatir. What are those instructions? Let's continue on and see.